Yep, we can see the screen
All right,
now.
I guess the answer is yes. Okay, so thank you again. And today I will talk about vaccination and its importance to Malaysia as invited by the Sunway Student Volunteers. So apart from being a member of the Malaysian Society of Allergy and Immunology, I'm also a staff and lecturer at Sunway University and at the School of Medical and Life Sciences. So the talk outline today will cover vaccines. And then we go into what are the preventable diseases, vaccine preventable diseases, vaccine schedules in Malaysia. And naturally, COVID-19 vaccines will be, on everybody's mind. So we are going to talk and touch about COVID-19 vaccines and look into why should we vaccinate against COVID-19. So let's move into the first topic. What is a vaccine? So vaccines are biological preparation that improves the immunity to a particular disease. And it contains certain agents that resemble the disease-causing microorganisms, but also is able to stimulate the immune system to recognize these foreign antigens. Edward Jenner is, historically one of the first persons to come up with a vaccine. He came up with a vaccine against smallpox. So smallpox infection was fatal and could cause disfiguring. So it was rather serious back in the day. In 1796, Jenner used cowpox virus to confer protection against smallpox. And this was the first example of using a whole organism or a live vaccine. And his discovery led to the birth of vaccination. This is, quite long ago in 1796. After that, the discovery of vaccine continued with Louis Pasteur and Emile Roux. This is back in 1885. They developed the first vaccines against rabies. And rabies vaccine was an example of the inactivated virus vaccine. So an interesting fact, so did you know that the word vaccines come from vacca? Vacca means cow, the Latin for cow, and it's to pay homage to Jenner, who actually came up with the first vaccine from a cow, so the cowpox vaccine. So we've talked a little bit about, the different vaccines, different types of vaccines. So let's look at all the different types that are available. So we have the live virus, live attenuated virus, inactivated virus, subunits, toxoids, and the latest mRNA vaccines. Live virus vaccines are exactly what it says. They are live, naturally occurring viruses. So they can activate the immune system, which means they can help our bodies to build antibodies, and they also can function as a virus. So as they're introduced into our body, let's say via injection, they can replicate, cause us to feel a little bit ill, but also build the antibodies against the virus what we are, fighting against. So the only example of the live virus vaccine is the cowpox virus to treat smallpox. So you may ask, oh, how can a cowpox virus treat smallpox? They're not the same thing. So you're absolutely right. It's not the same thing, but they can act by something called the cross-reactivity, which means that the antibodies against the cowpox virus actually recognizes the smallpox and is able to neutralize it. So it's able to disarm it and protect the body against this virus action. So it works. The next one I want to talk about is the live attenuated vaccine. So attenuated vaccines are viruses which are weakened. They are weakened by certain processes. So they can activate the immune system, but they cannot function as a virus. which means when the virus enters into the body, it cannot replicate within the cell. And these normally require 1 to 2 doses, and some examples which are commonly used are the MMR vaccines, the one against measles, mumps, and rubella, rotavirus, and varicella, so the chickenpox vaccine. Inactivated vaccines contain killed pathogen. So this is slightly different from the attenuated. The attenuated is just weakened, but here you have a killed pathogen. And inactivated vaccine also requires several shots. So you need to give first shot and then followed by booster shots. And some examples are the hepatitis A vaccine, rabies, and inactivated poliovirus. They are safe, but usually slightly less effective than an attenuated vaccine. Later part of a research into vaccines came up with subunit vaccines. Subunit vaccines means they use just a small part of the pathogen, so the antigenic component of the pathogen, and they require to give you several boosters of the shots. So some examples that are commonly in human use are Haemophilus influenza type B, human papillomavirus, and pneumococcal vaccines. Toxoid vaccines are toxins made out of pathogens. So normally, because toxins can cause toxic reactions, they are kind of detoxified and they only retain the properties that can stimulate the body to produce antibodies. And because toxoid vaccines are small in nature, we need to use other materials such as adjuvants to improve the vaccine potency. Commonly used toxoid vaccines are against diphtheria and pertussis, the whooping cough. mRNA vaccines have gained a lot of popularity in the recent year. There's no surprise that it has garnered public interest due to the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. The mRNA vaccine contains the genetic material that codes for the parts of pathogen. So it tells the body, just based on the genetic material, what should it do? It should produce an antibody against that particular part of the virus. As we all know, mRNA vaccines requires booster shots. So both Pfizer and Moderna vaccines requires 2 shots for it to reach its maximal efficacy. Now, how do vaccines work? So generally, when the body is exposed to a weakened or dead pathogen or the genetic material coding for a pathogen, i.e. the vaccine, what happens next? The body's immune cells make antibodies to attack the pathogen. The body's cells also makes another class of cells called the memory cells who can remember the exact pathogen. And if the body is exposed to the virus again, or the pathogen again, the memory cells will be able to produce the antibodies very, very rapidly. So this is how vaccines work in general. Now that we know a little bit about vaccines, let's have a look at some of the vaccine preventable diseases. The purpose of vaccination is to boost the immunity to a microorganism. Immunization alone, this is, not only to COVID, but to every other thing, saves up to 3 million lives annually. And vaccines are able to protect against 26 infectious diseases to date, with more in research and development. So we have a list down there. It includes cholera, dengue, diphtheria, etc., up to yellow fever. So if you just take a moment to imagine a world without vaccines, about 100 years ago, measles caused the death of millions of children annually. So there's a picture with a young boy with measles. So he has blotchy macular rash on the face, arms, and also the neck. So if you just think of, if this child did not get the vaccine, he would not even grow up to be an adult, and he will not have children of his own. In 1918, there was a flu pandemic that had a devastating impact, killing up to 5% of the world's population. So here we have a picture of an emergency hospital in Kansas, in USA, during the 1918 influenza pandemic. And it killed 50 million people worldwide. This was just about 100 years ago. 5% of the world's population was just wiped out. Then only 30 years ago, polio left thousands of children with life-limiting disabilities. They have a child in the picture, has severely deformed leg caused by polio. And although polio has been eliminated from most of the world, until poliovirus transmission is interrupted in every country, all countries still remain at risk for the importation of polio. And this is still actual news today. Only 20 years ago, pneumococcus, which is a common bacteria, caused more than 800,000 deaths every year. And this affects mostly children. The symptoms of pneumococcus are very varied. It can cause meningitis, which is the inflammation of the brain, middle ear infections, pneumonia, or whole body septicemia, where your body becomes septic and could lead to fatalities. So what about COVID? So this data is what is available today on the WHO's website. As of right now, there are 127 million confirmed cases of COVID-19, with more than 2 million deaths. Thankfully, there are vaccines available, which we will talk about shortly, and about 520 million people have been vaccinated so far. So we have seen that vaccines can eradicate diseases, but the declining coverage puts progress at risk. So what do I mean by that? Immunization has eradicated smallpox officially in 1979. So this is like the biggest success story of vaccination ever. Immunization has reduced wild poliovirus by more than 99%. The global vaccine coverage has stagnated at 86%, which means there are still 14% of people who are not fully vaccinated by all these different preventable diseases. And only in 2017, 4 years ago, large measles outbreak had affected 1 in 4 European countries. And why? Because people refused to get vaccinated due to misinformation about vaccines. How about in Malaysia? What is our status of the vaccination schedule? So we are very lucky to have a very good healthcare system in Malaysia. So a newborn child gets vaccinated almost every other month to get protected against various preventable diseases, from the BCG vaccination against tuberculosis, hepatitis B, to the measles, Japanese encephalitis, etc. But is the coverage of these vaccines sufficient? So I looked into this to find out what is the situation in Malaysia. And we look at data from 2 different studies. So one was done quite a while ago in 2005. Here they looked at infants with an average age of 5.7 months, so around 6 months old. And at this point, they found out that 22% of the infants had incomplete immunization. So among all the individuals that they studied, 78% had complete immunization and 22% were incomplete. When they looked into this more deeply, they found out that 64% of these infants had missed more than one vaccines. When they probed further to find out why did they miss more than one vaccine? It was purely due to either misinformation of the contraindications, so what could be the side effects, etc., or they were miscommunications on the vaccination date, so they did not turn up at the right time to get the right vaccine. So simple information like this, or miscommunication, had led to these infants missing their vaccines, missing their booster shots, which makes them, not protected against a preventable disease. Another study, which was done in 2019, so just 2 years ago, surveyed 337 parents in Kuala Lumpur. And here they found out that the vaccine hesitancy was about 14%. When asked why were these individuals hesitant to get the vaccine. So the data was pointing towards several reasons. So people were wary and they were worried about new vaccines that were introduced. They had negative past experiences. They did not trust the pharmaceutical industry or the health system. And most of these people who had trust issues were male, so the male parent, the fathers. So really, before I move on, although vaccines have been created by scientists, tested, shown to be effective, if it does not reach the final individual where it's deemed to reach, which is a person who is vulnerable to get the disease, then it is still not going to be effective in providing protection to the individual. So now let's talk about what is on everybody's minds probably, the COVID-19 vaccine. So I will cover what are the types available, how do they work, as well as a little bit on these efficacies of the vaccines. So the first type I would like to talk about is the genetic vaccine or the nucleic acid vaccines. So the examples in human use currently are the Pfizer, BioNTech, and the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. So we know that both of these are the mRNA vaccines, and they contain a segment of the SARS-CoV-2 virus genetic material. So nothing of the protein, nothing of the virus per se, but just the genetic material. So once the virus is injected into our body, this genetic material enters into the cell and tells the cell, hey, can you make this antibody against the SARS-CoV-2 virus? And the antibody is made to a specific part of the virus, which is the S protein. And this S protein is the protein that binds to the cell in a natural infection case. Okay, so now the body is able to build the immune response and fight off SARS-CoV-2 in the future, when it gets affected by the SARS-CoV-2 virus. mRNA vaccines are new in the market right now, but the technology is really not new. So mRNA vaccines have been already studied for influenza, Zika, rabies, and even cytomegalovirus. But it's only now we are hearing about mRNA vaccines. And later on, I'll explain to you, why is this so. But let's look at the next type of vaccine technology available. The next one I want to talk about is the inactivated vaccines. So an example of this is the Sinovac vaccine, which has already arrived in Malaysia and been given to some high-profile individuals. The Sinovac vaccine is different from the Pfizer vaccine in that it contains the killed SARS-CoV-2 virus, so it's inactivated. So the killed virus can be recognized as an antigen, that means something which is foreign to the body, but it cannot replicate in the cells. So what does this mean? So if it cannot replicate, it means that it cannot produce more baby viruses or more virus, and it cannot cause you to become ill with SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. What it can do is allow the body to provide you with antibodies, so build antibodies against this particular vaccine. So it gives you the immunity, but it does not make you sick. The third one is a viral vector vaccine, and some examples are the Oxford or AstraZeneca vaccine. And another one that is coming up soon into the markets and has been FDA approved in the US is the Johnson & Johnson or the Janssen vaccine. So here they're using two different technologies together. They're using the SARS-CoV-2 genetic material, and instead of delivering it like in the Pfizer through a nanoparticle or lipid nanoparticle, it is now being delivered to the body in a viral vector. And the most common viral vector that they are using is the adenovirus viral vector, which gives some kind of flu-like symptoms, very mild flu-like symptoms, and nothing more. And the advantage of this viral vector is it behaves like a vehicle to deliver the genetic material into the cell. So the lipid nanoparticle of the Pfizer and Moderna does the same thing. It behaves like a vehicle to deliver the genetic material into the cell. So it's just different technologies. The next one is an attenuated vaccine. So this one has not come into the market. Examples in human use are oral polio vaccines, and clinical trials for COVID-19 is Codagenix. Here it contains the weakened SARS-CoV-2 virus. As I've said before, it's just weakened, it cannot replicate, but it triggers the body to produce antibodies. There are also protein vaccines. So instead of putting the genetic material or the virus per se in an inactivated or killed form, now they're putting in a protein from the SARS-CoV-2. So the protein that they're putting in are proteins of the S protein, which is the part where the the protein of the SARS-CoV-2 virus that is recognized by our human cells. These kind of vaccines are already in use in humans, so the hepatitis B vaccine uses this formulation. For COVID-19, Novavax and Sanofi GSK are also developing protein vaccines. So among all the different types of vaccines available, which are the vaccines which FDA approvals? So currently, as of today, there are 3 vaccines that have received the FDA emergency use authorization. So these are the Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, and Janssen. So Janssen is the most recent vaccine that has obtained authorization for emergency use. So we know that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are mRNA vaccines with a 2-dose schedule, and people vaccinated should complete both the doses with the same vaccine product. Whereas the Janssen vaccine is a viral vector vaccine with a single dose schedule. What we do not know yet is how long will these vaccines be protective in nature. So this is yet to be investigated, and the data is continuously being collected. What about Malaysia? So vaccines with NPRA approval. So the NPRA is the National Pharmaceutical Regulatory Agency, and that's the body in charge for vaccination approval for national usage in Malaysia. So this data is true as of March 19. It has conditionally approved the following vaccines from Sinovac, AstraZeneca, Pfizer BioNTech, to be used in Malaysia. You can continuously be updated, yourself by looking at this for this type of information online. So when I went into the NPRA website, you can actually find all the information to know what are the products that are being approved, the companies, the manufacturer, and the dates for which they are being valid for approval. So I invite you to be a bit more aware of these different regulatory procedures and actually go and check it out for yourselves. So now that we know all these different type of vaccines, there have been some concerns to say how effective are these vaccines. So this data is of 2nd of February 2021. The reason I put the dates is because this information is continually evolving, and it's important to know what is the most updated information available to us. So at present, the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine is showing about 95% efficacy. The Sputnik 5 about 92%. And maybe we'll just highlight the Johnson & Johnson at 66%. So why the difference? And maybe before that, what is vaccine efficacy? What does it mean? So vaccine efficacy is the percent of reduction in disease in a group of people who have received vaccination in a clinical trial. So this differs from the term vaccine effectiveness, which means how well a vaccine works when it's given to a community of people outside the clinical trials, i.e. the real world. So all the data that you saw in the previous slide was about vaccine efficacy. Okay, so all new vaccines go through clinical trials to test how well they work. And the developers try to determine what is their main goal of the trial. And these goals are called the primary endpoint. So for all these different vaccines, the primary endpoint was on preventing new cases of symptomatic COVID-19. And this is extremely important for you to know. Okay, so it's for preventing new cases of symptomatic COVID-19. So the scientists could calculate how well a vaccine candidate works by looking at the difference in the new cases of the disease between the groups that receive placebo and the group that receive experimental vaccine. So this is called vaccine efficacy. So how do we calculate that? So we'll take an example of the Pfizer BioNTech who reported efficacy of 95%. So this means that there is a 95% reduction in new cases of the disease in the vaccine group compared to with the placebo group. So the Pfizer clinical trial involved 43,000 people. So of these 43,000, 170 in the trial got symptomatic COVID-19. And when they looked at this 170, 162 individuals were from the placebo group, so they did not receive the vaccine, they received placebo, could be salt water. And 8 people from the vaccinated group got COVID-19, symptomatic COVID-19. So to calculate the symptomatic cases, you divide 8 by 170. So that's 5% of people who got vaccinated also got symptomatic COVID-19. So the efficacy rate then becomes 95%, which means that a vaccinated individual is 95% less likely to get sick with COVID-19 compared to unvaccinated individual. Okay. So if we stack them up again, we see that Pfizer vaccines, Moderna vaccines showing about 95% efficacy, and towards the lower end you have the AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson showing about 66% efficacy. So does that mean that Pfizer and Moderna are better vaccines? So let's look at that. So in fact, these vaccines were tested in different clinical trial settings, and they involve different virus variants. So we'll first look at the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. So the trials were done in the summer in US. And you can see that the number of cases were, from the graph, relatively low. When we looked at the Johnson & Johnson trial, they were done slightly later, so moving into the winter months. And the number of cases were definitely much higher than that of the Pfizer and Moderna, which means they got more people, who were sick at that time. The Johnson & Johnson trial also was held in multiple sites, so in South Africa and in Brazil. And in addition to, being tested when they were most sick people in different populations, it also took into consideration that it was testing people that were infected with different variants of the virus. So for example, in South Africa, about 67% of the cases analyzed were from the B.1.351 variant. So the key differences that we could observe in the Johnson & Johnson trials were there were 3 main trial centers. There were higher case rates compared to Pfizer and Moderna. And there were different virus variants that were tested against. So then can we compare these vaccines? Is there, a best vaccine? So we have already seen that these clinical trials were conducted in different settings. And therefore, it is really not fair to make head-to-head comparisons. Because if you imagine that, what if Pfizer and Moderna vaccines were conducted at the same time and at the same, with the same population of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, perhaps the number, the efficacy rate, could be different from what is currently being reported. But what is really underlying factor that everybody needs to take home, if you take home nothing else from today's talk, at least this, that all the vaccines comply with WHO's 50% efficacy mandate. So the World Health Organization, requires a vaccine to be 50% efficacious, and this has been shown by all the vaccines currently available in the market. And the second point is that all the vaccines had 100% effectiveness in preventing hospitalizations and deaths due to COVID-19 infections. So let's take a look at this. At the best case scenario, everybody is hoping for a vaccine that when given to them is like a silver bullet and you get no infections from the virus whatsoever. But in reality, what all the vaccines are promising is currently this. They prevent you from getting severe symptoms of COVID-19, prevent you to get hospitalized, and prevent you from dying, prevent the person from dying. So here is what Malaysia is procuring at the moment, all the different types of vaccines. So we know that we already have Pfizer, and we've kind of completed phase 1 of the vaccination, the National Immunization Program. And currently, Sinovac vaccine is in, and is probably going to be distributed among the population. So we have to wait and see what's coming next, and which is going to be procured more. But this is currently what has already been agreed upon. So I want to move on now to the next part of the talk, which is why vaccinate against COVID-19. What are the benefits? And I'll touch upon some of the common safety concerns and address those. So being vaccinated against COVID-19 actually has multiple benefits. So for one, it builds your immunity, it reduces the chances of infection. It can also protect others. So these others are vulnerable individuals, individuals with comorbidities, and basically those who are not eligible to get the vaccine. It can create herd immunity, something that we'll talk about later. So this reduces the community spread, and the current SOP, the best practice, is vaccination and maintaining the current SOPs for now. So mask wearing, hand washing, and social distancing. And finally, we all know that COVID-19 vaccines eventually will help us to regain some level of normality. Even now, there's already been an increase in the number of face-to-face meetups. Eventually, there'll be more and more social activities, perhaps travel bubbles, and more and more economic activities will open up. We know that last year there was a lot of devastating effects from the virus, that the activities, economic activities shut down. We could not meet our loved ones, and we're kind of trapped at home. So with the COVID-19 vaccines, we hope that everything slowly regains some level of normality. So here's one of the concerns on the COVID-19 vaccine development. People ask, how is it that you can create a vaccine in 1 year, or maybe even less than 1 year? And many vaccines, all the other vaccines in the past took years and years to develop. Like, is this a marketing gimmick? Is this a pharmaceutical thing to get money out of people? What's happening here? So let's address that. So in fact, COVID-19 or SARS, the SARS virus family, is not new. There have been prior research on coronaviruses. So there are actually hundreds of coronaviruses that exist. 4 that cause common colds. Then we had the SARS outbreak in 2002. The MERS outbreak in 2012. And SARS and MERS are, different types of coronaviruses. Now, in fact, the current one is SARS-CoV-2. And then the importance of the viral spike protein, the S protein, has already been studied previously. So they know about, how this S protein attaches to the cell, how it fuses into the cell, how it enters into the cells, and they have already been targets for antibodies and vaccines for therapies. And in fact, the Oxford University team has already worked on an adenovirus-based vaccine against MERS. So the second reason why there's such a speedy development of the COVID-19 vaccine is worldwide collaboration. So what does it mean? When the virus hit Wuhan, there was genomic sequencing data of this virus, which were done by the Chinese researchers and shared with all researchers worldwide. There was also fast track on research and clinical trials. So there was a massive reduction in red tape by the FDA and CDC to prioritize COVID-19 vaccines. as well as massive funding from multiple funders to provide researchers sufficient amount of money to conduct their research without any hindrance. Third was this mRNA technology. mRNA vaccines are much faster to produce than conventional virus vaccines, for the simple reason that you don't need to grow up the virus to a particular concentration and then do a treatment, so either attenuation or to kill it, or even to produce proteins. Takes quite a long time to produce it at the correct purity and concentration. So mRNA technology greatly sped up the process. Then we had the clinical trials. We had people who were sick with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So we had an availability of a large number of infected individuals. So this really helps in a clinical trial when you want to have patients, cases versus controls. In addition, they use clinical trial networks, which already existed to conduct the clinical trials, but employed rigorous guidelines and FDA scrutiny for the trials, followed by safety monitoring after the vaccination. So since we're talking about clinical trials, let's just briefly look at what it is. So there are actually 4 phases in clinical trials. The first phase involves a very small number of healthy volunteers to just answer the questions: is the vaccine safe? Are there any serious side effects? How does the dose relate to the side effects? And is it actually working? Is it causing an immune response? Once a vaccine clears phase 1, we can then do phase 2 that involves several hundred volunteers. And here they try to answer these particular questions. What are the most common short-term side effects? What are the immune responses like? And any signs that this vaccine is actually protective. In phase 3, more volunteers are employed. So you have 1,000 plus volunteers. And they look at things that we've addressed previously, which are what are the disease rates in people who are vaccinated against people who are not vaccinated, and how well can the vaccine actually protect people from getting a disease. And finally, in phase 4, when the vaccine is approved, the FDA only approves the vaccine if it's safe, if it's effective, and the benefits outweigh the risk. And the research, at least for COVID-19 vaccines, are continually collecting data on the long-term benefits and any side effects that may pop up. So there is a continuous safety monitoring that is occurring. So there's a collection and review of data, monitoring of side effects, identifying and understanding the risk, and communicating and managing the risk appropriately. So these 4 elements are extremely important in any vaccine rollout. Having said that, now let's look at some real safety concerns which are emerging as the vaccines are being rolled out in Malaysia. So the first one I want to touch about is that of allergic reaction, severe allergic reaction known as anaphylaxis. Anaphylaxis is a known but rare adverse effect. And most reactions of anaphylaxis occurs within 15 minutes. And therefore, vaccinees are observed at vaccination centers for 15 to 30 minutes post-vaccination. Have there been cases of anaphylaxis? Yes, they have. In US, there have been 5 cases in 1 million doses of vaccines administered, no deaths. In UK, there have been 130 cases in 7 million doses of vaccines administered. Again, no deaths. So what is this anaphylaxis? So it is a severe allergic reaction that occurs systemically, which means it occurs all throughout your body, and it can lead to multiple outcomes. including headaches and anxiety, shortness of breath, fast heart rate, low blood pressure, itching and swelling, and abdominal pain. And because it affects multiple organs at a time, especially in the terms of heart and lungs, when you cannot breathe properly and you have low blood pressure, this can lead to fatal outcomes. So people actually have died of anaphylaxis. And this is why it's such a great concern. So if a patient is allergic, can he or she take the COVID-19 vaccine? So one thing that is important to understand is like the allergic reactions to the vaccines, at least for COVID-19 vaccines, have been identified to be due to the adjuvants or the other excipients, so like preservatives that have been added to the vaccine instead of the actual active ingredient. So in terms of risk assessment, so the medical specialists and the allergists are proposing these type of screening questions for the individuals who are allergic. So here are the questions. Do you have a history of severe allergic reaction or anaphylaxis to an injectable drug or suppository drug? Or do you have a history of severe allergic reaction or anaphylaxis to a previous vaccine? If the answer is yes, then the doctor should check if the injectable drug or vaccine contains the following components, such as polyethylene glycol or PEG, polysorbates or polyoxyl 35 castor oil. So if it's yes to those, then it's considered to be as a higher risk individual. If it's no, it's considered to be a medium risk. So how do we deal with this kind of patients then? Patients that fall in a higher risk group should be skin tested by allergists for those components I mentioned before, so PEG and polysorbates, and to go through a clinical phenotyping to understand more of the risk of these allergies. And the advice currently is to avoid vaccines with PEG and polysorbates. So these are the vaccines that currently have these additives. PEG 2000 is found in Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. And the polysorbate 80 is found in AstraZeneca and the Sputnik 5, the Gamaleya vaccine. So for the medium risk group, they will be individuals that are having severe allergic reactions to injectable drugs that do not contain PEG or polysorbate, or they have severe allergic reactions to food, drugs, and venom or latex. Or it could be a history of idiopathic anaphylaxis, which means that we do not know what's the real cause of the anaphylaxis. So the action for these patients are to do routine vaccination with a longer observation time, so for 30 minutes, to look at if there's any allergic reactions or anaphylaxis developing after they get the COVID-19 vaccines. The third group is a low risk group. So this group of individuals have the history of allergic reaction, but not anaphylaxis to food, drugs, venom, latex, or injectable drugs. History to any prior reactions to previous vaccine except anaphylaxis, or they could be having allergic asthma or allergic rhinitis to any allergens of the environment. The action for these patients are to go on as usual, do the routine vaccination with 15 minutes of observation. So the key takeaway for allergies is avoid vaccines that contain substances that you're allergic to. If you're unsure, go and meet with the specialists, the allergists, to have a consultation to understand what you should and should not do in terms of COVID-19 vaccination. The second safety concern is about the risk of fatal outcomes in elderly individuals. So this data came out in January this year, by the Norwegian Medicine Agency, which reported 23 deaths associated with Comirnaty. Comirnaty is the Pfizer vaccine. The deaths occurred 6 days post-vaccination, and a review by the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee revealed that the plausible cause of death among these frail and elderly individuals were linked to multiple pre-existing diseases. So in Malaysia, we have not had any cases of deaths due to vaccination. There were some sporadic cases which have been already reported to not be caused by the COVID-19 vaccines. And the NPRA is currently overseeing the safety monitoring of Comirnaty and any other vaccine as they are being rolled out. The latest safety concern is the risk of blood clots. So in March, which is early this month, the blood clot story has come out to be linked to the AstraZeneca vaccine. So let's look at the whole context. Of the 20 million people who has received vaccines in both UK and the European Economic Area, 7 cases of blood clot in multiple vessels were reported, and there were 18 cases of cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, which are clot in the vessels that drain blood from the brain. This gives you one important piece of information, that this occurrence is extremely rare. Okay. The second point that I want to make is, although immediately the blame shifting happened to AstraZeneca vaccine because they received the vaccine and then the blood clot occurred, COVID-19 infection, so not the vaccine, but the viral infection, also causes blood clots. And the reports on COVID-19 causing blood clots has come up in the early part of 2020 already. So on the 18th of March, which is about 10 days ago, the European Medical Agency had a meeting. And the report from this meeting identified that the benefit of the COVID-19 vaccines actually outweighs the risk, that the vaccine was not associated with an increased overall risk of blood clots. But the vaccine may be associated with extremely rare cases of blood clots that are associated with low platelet counts and rare cases of CVSC. So the recommendation currently is that the recipients should seek immediate medical attention if they have symptoms such as bruising or bleeding, persistent or severe headaches, particularly beyond 3 days after the vaccination. So I was asking myself, what is the acceptance rate of COVID-19 vaccination in Malaysia? So this data is taken from Star Media and is dated December 2020. 67% of Malaysian individuals surveyed said that they will take the COVID-19 vaccine, but you still had 1/3 of the population who were either unsure or reported that they will not take the vaccine due to various reasons. How do we overcome this, and how do we improve the vaccination uptake? So there are just a few ways that we can do this. So continual education, such as this type of webinars to transmit the information and to generate a good dialogue. Having transparency of the findings. So if you find that there's an adverse effect or an allergic reaction to the vaccine, to actually look into it to see what is it that is causing these reactions. Is it real, or is it just a hyped up media statement? And continuous dialogues with all the stakeholders, which is from the government agencies to the pharmaceutical agencies to the public. So who should get the COVID-19 vaccine? So everybody which has, it is 18 years old and above can be vaccinated. Those with comorbidities are at high risk of suffering from severe disease if they're infected, and they should be vaccinated. So if you are suffering from this type of comorbidities, you should consider being vaccinated, and they should be prioritized. The vaccination is also safe and recommended for those who suffering from acute illness. You can wait for 2 weeks after recovery, after receiving any other vaccines, for lactating mothers, for individuals with mild allergies, for HIV patients in stable condition, and those who are infected with COVID-19 to wait between 3 to 6 months after recovery, and you can receive your vaccination as well. As I've talked about allergies, there are some contraindications. So if you have severe allergies or anaphylaxis after receiving the COVID-19 vaccine, the first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, you need to consult your medical practitioner to look at what are your options. If you have looked at the questionnaire, the stratifying questionnaire, so if you have had any previous anaphylaxis, you may want to look at some vaccines that do not contain those allergenic components. So consult your doctor. If you have allergies and unsure about the severity of your allergies, if you have blood disorders, weakened immune system, or receiving long-term steroids. So all these individuals should actually consult their doctors to find out what is the best solution for them. I want to end the talk with a little bit on herd immunity, because after this we will be playing a game to exercise our knowledge on herd immunity. So what is it? Herd immunity is the ability to resist pathogens. So it applies to various different infections, not only COVID, but we'll talk about it in relation to COVID-19. So how can we get immune against COVID-19? There are two ways. One is you get naturally infected with the virus. So in that case, two things happen to you, right? So firstly, you get sick, but you also build antibodies against COVID-19. The second route to be immune to COVID-19 is getting vaccination. So vaccination is different from natural infection because it gives you the protection, the antibodies, but does not make you sick with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So you don't have all the complications that come with the infection. Regardless, the protection, the immune protection, protects you against severe infections of COVID-19. So it kind of acts like a shield against this attack of the virus. So let's look at one scenario. This scenario shows you that you have no vaccine. So in the early phase, you have the virus that comes and infects the first individual, and because of close contact, he infects other individuals near him, and the viral infection spreads unchecked. So here you have no vaccine. People who do not have immunity against COVID-19. So how does this end up? The later stage, it ends up that everyone who is in close contact with the first individual gets infected with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So this is what you hear about the clusters, and the clusters are having X number of individuals and everybody's infected because they're in close contact with each other. So how does the vaccine help? So with vaccine, you build immunity. So let's consider the scenario where you have, you still have an infected individual who could infect somebody else who is not vaccinated. Then part of the community who is eligible gets vaccinated. So these are the green people. But you also know that in every community, there are people who do not qualify for vaccination due to various reasons. So these are the blue individuals. So vaccine acts to break the chain of viral infections. So let's look at what happens at the later stage after the vaccination takes into effect. The infected individual still cannot be safe because he didn't get vaccinated. The vaccinated individual is protected. They are shielded against getting severe disease, severe forms of the infection. But what about those people who did not qualify to be vaccinated? So the blue ones, they are still protected by proxy by these individuals who got vaccinated earlier. So these individuals who did not qualify could be children, elderly individuals, or the immunocompromised people. So this really shows you how the vaccine can help to break the chain of infection, protects you, it protects people around you, especially those who are vulnerable and those who cannot get the vaccine. So how many people should be vaccinated to achieve this herd immunity or protective community protection against the virus? So this all depends on the number, which is known as R0. R0 is the average number of people that an infected person can spread a disease to. And the R0 value changes from one virus to another. The R0 value also changes from one situation to another, from one time to another time. So it's really very variable, and it's a dynamic number that keeps changing. So worldwide, the R0 value for COVID-19 estimated about 3. So what this means is one individual is capable of spreading the virus to 3 of his close contacts. So for herd immunity, they need to vaccinate about 67% of the population to achieve herd immunity and protecting individuals which are immunocompromised and cannot get the vaccine. So with that, I want to end with a small promotion of the upcoming event by the Malaysian Society of Allergy and Immunology, which is a public event for the Malaysian Allergy Day. So this is a national event, which is in collaboration with the World Allergy Organization and in line with the World Allergy Week, actually. So if you would like to get more information on this, you could scan the QR codes for either the Facebook page, which links you to the society, or the Instagram page. So I'll take the opportunity now to thank the organizers for inviting me, and I'm open to receive and answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kavita, for the wonderful sharing of knowledge. So I bet everyone here has enjoyed and learning a thing or two about vaccination. So now we actually proceed to the Q&A session. So anyone who's interested to ask any questions, you can actually type your question in the chat section, and I will actually read it out and voice it out to Dr. Kavita. Or if let's say you do not want to type it out, you can also unmute your mic and read out your questions. So during the session, I actually received some questions from participants. So among the question is, why is there no vaccines for HIV yet?
That's a fabulous question, and that's been a burning question that has been asked time and time again by so many people. So if you remember, I shared with you why did COVID-19 vaccines get priority, right? Because for multiple reasons, the whole world was kind of infected, and everybody was concerned, and no one had immunity against this particular virus. So people were getting sick, they were getting very sick, and a lot of people were dying, and nobody could do anything about it. So there was an accelerated vaccine production, which was pushed, the agenda was pushed by people who had money, people who were important enough in power status. they pushed for this research and development to occur at an extremely rapid pace. Of course, the availability of mRNA technology also helped that it could speed up the process. And as I mentioned earlier, there were a lot of sick people. So clinical trials could be done really with a good number of people to ensure safety, efficacy, etc. Then why not HIV, right? So it's really an unfortunate state, and it's actually the state of a lot of other diseases that are not getting sufficient attention. So why not HIV? Could also be asked as another form of question, why not dengue? Why not all these other third world country diseases or diseases that hit people which are less favorable? If I could say that a politically correct way. The reasons are actually quite straightforward and quite unfortunate. So it's all to do with funding. How much money do people get to research on these diseases? What is the agenda of the huge organizations, the World Health Organizations and all the other researchers? Is there a concerted collaborative effort worldwide? So if you look at the HIV status, who does HIV affect? If you consider that and consider the people who are giving the funding, there is a little mismatch over there. And all these together with the fact that the, what do you call that? The cases of HIV is actually a huge social stigma because of the way that the virus is actually transmitted from one person to another, does not help the situation. But a special case about HIV is actually that the antiviral against HIV is actually quite effective from keeping somebody from spreading the virus actively. But because of the social stigma, that if I go and get the antiviral against HIV, that people will know that I'm HIV positive, and they will start avoiding me and secluding me from all social events. I may not get a job, etc. People are even not getting this antiviral, which is actually quite effective. So all these reasons put a position that individuals who are funders, they are hesitant to actually pump the money in because they say, now if I give you a vaccine, are you actually going to use it? So there are many sides of this story. It's actually a very complicated situation. So many sides of the story, it's not only that you need money, but you also need people to agree to take the vaccine, and that vaccine hesitancy, the social stigma, all has to be dealt with. So there's the science bit, there's the money bit, and then there's the, just general education acceptance bit. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, that's actually a very detailed answer, Dr. Kavita. So we'll move on to the next question by Honman here. So hi, Dr. Kavita. Generally, will vaccine cause problems to our body?
So I don't understand the context of the question, but I'll try my best to address it. The vaccines cause problems. So when we look at the reactions of the vaccines or the immediate reactions to the body, what has been reported for the COVID-19 vaccine? So most of this data are the Pfizer/Moderna data, because these are the vaccines that have been administered to the public. So the real world data is coming out now. At the first injection, there's some kind of soreness at the site of injection. And some people complain about, a little bit of fever, weakness, body chills, and slightly more reaction to the second dose. So more complaints of, arm or muscular pain, feeling a little bit weak, so to speak, and a bit tired, you can say, after receiving the second dose. And the research is pointing towards, I'm trying to answer why this is so. So if you're saying feeling, bad effects, so this could be what you're talking about. But this is mainly due to the cytokines that are being produced, the interferons, so all the different immune molecules that are being produced at a higher rate in your body, because now you've been given the dose, or you've been given the booster dose against the vaccine. And the doctors have actually come up to say that if you're actually having these kind of symptoms or outcomes after getting the vaccine, is actually a good sign. It means that the vaccine is actually working, it's actually stimulating your immune system, because you cannot see the antibody being produced. It's all minuscule, it's all at a very molecular level. But these are the signs that can tell you that, hey, my body is doing something which is different from usual. It's actually building up its army of antibodies to combat against the virus. But if you're talking about something which is more severe, like the allergic reaction, the anaphylactic reaction, so I think I've covered that before. So you need to actually, if you have previous symptoms, to talk to your doctor, to have a conversation, maybe have a pre-test to see, are you eligible for certain type of vaccine? So the benefit we have now is there are quite a range of vaccines with different type of ingredients. So if you're allergic to vaccine A, you may be eligible to take another vaccine that can protect you against this virus. So that's something that you need to keep in mind. Understand your own health status and be honest and open and have the discussion with your doctor.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kavita. Then we will go for one last question from Wan Yi. So thank you, Dr. Kavita, for the insightful talk. I wanted to ask, why does mRNA vaccine gain better popularity compared to the other types?
So in terms of popularity, Wan Yi, if you're talking about the efficacy, so this was like the number that was first published. It's kind of a race, all right, among all the different vaccine companies. So we have seen that for the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, they actually did their trials much earlier in the timeline compared to the Johnson & Johnson. I've just showed you these two and not showed you everything. But Pfizer and Moderna basically did the trials earlier than everybody else, phase 3 clinical trials. We also know that the mRNA technology is easier to produce. It produces the vaccines much faster. They could do their trials much earlier, so they got their data earlier than everybody else. And if you remember, it was a time where everybody was feeling so, they had this feeling of desperation, when is the vaccine coming? They kept thinking that the vaccine is a silver bullet, it's going to solve every problem that they had, that they could, unmask themselves, get into the public, hug their friends. But reality is it's not really the case. But the mRNA vaccine data came out first. Not only that, but the data was amazing. It showed 95% efficacy rate, and everybody was like, wow, that's, that's really fantabulous. Now I can go on my life, being normal again. But slowly reports were coming to say, listen, there are difficulties in transporting this vaccine because of the nanoparticle status of the lipid bilayer. So there's going to be some transportation challenges. Then there were cases of the adverse effects, the anaphylaxis, because of the adjuvants used in these particular vaccines. But the efficacy rates are still great. So this kept the popularity, the availability was there, the data was out there. And in fact, I was reading just today that the real world data from Israel, so Israel had already vaccinated more than half of the population, is actually showing a similar effectiveness data. I talked about effectiveness and efficacy previously, of about more than 90%. So it's actually mimicking the data from the clinical trial, which is absolutely fantastic information. We don't know the real effectiveness data from the other different vaccines, but we hope to be able to get this information soon enough. Having said that, we know that the mRNA vaccines can also cause allergic reactions to people who have had anaphylaxis to the components before. So while it's suitable for a wide spectrum of people, there are the population that may benefit from other vaccines. So information, knowledge, and speaking to your medical practitioner is actually very, very important in this case. I hope that answers your question, Wani.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kavita, for answering the question. So I think that is all for the Q&A session today. So we'll actually now move on to a short game session. So thank you for all the amazing questions from our participants. So it shows that everyone was focusing during their sharing. So we'll actually now move on to a game. So as mentioned during the start of the session, so hopefully everyone has downloaded the Excel file. And if you have not, you can actually click the Excel file link in the chat section so that you can access the file and download it. So we'll wait for around 20 seconds for everyone to get ready, and then we'll begin with the game session. So, yeah. So if let's say you are actually ready with the file, you can actually type done in the chat section, then we can actually proceed with the game session. So has everyone downloaded the Excel file? Okay, so I see that a majority has actually downloaded the Excel file for the game. So we will actually now start the game session. So within the file, you will actually see 3 sets of 8x8 grid, which will be used for the game. So for this game, the main aim of this game is actually to see how a virus spread through a population. So please note that for this game, we are assuming that vaccines provide permanent immunity to a given population towards a given disease. So please note that there is actually no study that proves that vaccines provide permanent immunity. So for this game, so you will see this grid in your Excel file. So within this Excel file, you have to imagine that there is a population of people that consists of 64 people, 32 are vaccinated, and 32 are susceptible to a given disease. So we'll just call this disease A for now. So the vaccinated individuals are actually indicated by the black color, and for the susceptible individual, meaning individual who will actually get the disease if they're exposed to the virus, we will actually label them as the yellow boxes here or the yellow circle here. So for this Excel file, right, so we will now actually randomly fill in these 64 people into the grid using this color. So what I mean by that is you can actually fill in, so it will look something like this. But of course, in Excel, you can use the fill the box function to actually fill the whole box with yellow or black. So I will give 30 seconds for everyone to fill in your boxes. So you do not have to follow what I have here. You can actually randomly fill in to your liking and see how you actually want to fill the box. So we'll wait for 30 seconds. So again, once you are done filling in your box, you can actually type done in the chat section, and I will proceed to the next instruction. So just a small reminder. So for this game, we're actually assuming that all vaccinated people in this population, even though they are vaccinated, they are actually immune to the virus, and we are assuming that. So in actual fact, there's actually no study that proves that the vaccine provides permanent immunity. This is a small disclaimer. So we'll wait for another 30 seconds. Once everyone is done filling in their Excel, the grid, we will actually proceed to the next step. So I see there are some people who are already done with filling up the boxes. So we'll wait for a few more seconds. Okay, so yeah, I think I'll proceed with the next step. So moving on. So for this disease A, it will actually affect anyone who is actually susceptible to a virus, which is logical, right? Because if you are vaccinated, you will actually no longer get the virus for this game. So for this yellow boxes, because they represent the susceptible individual, so you may choose any one of them to get infected. Okay, so among all these yellow circles here, all of them are susceptible to the virus. So let's say any one of these circles, the yellow circle, they will get the virus. So it will actually look something like this. So let's say I choose this middle circle here to be the first case. So in your grid, you can actually choose any one of the susceptible individuals to actually get infected by the virus. Okay? So once you have chosen who to get infected with the virus, you can label them with the number 1. So this represents that they are actually the first layer of the population who has contracted the virus. So what will happen to the susceptible participants is, or susceptible individual is, since they have the virus, they will actually expose the people around them to the virus. So the circles which are on top, bottom, to the left, and to the right of the given individual, they are all exposed to the virus. So because they are exposed to the virus, they can actually contract the disease if they are not vaccinated. So in this case, because the left and the right are the black dots, they will no longer get the virus because they have been vaccinated, as assumed in this game. So for the top and bottom, because they are susceptible individuals, they will actually contract the virus and actually become the second layer. So from here, you can actually label the top and bottom circles as number 2. So it will look something like this. So because these are the susceptible neighbors, you actually infect them. So you label them as number 2, so they are the second layer. So I'll give 30 seconds for everyone to identify your first layer and second layer. So once you are done, we will actually proceed with the next step. So again, if you are done, you can just type in the chat section and say that you are done. Then I will move on. Okay, I see that a majority has found their second layer. So for this epidemic, so we're assuming that this is an epidemic also. So for this epidemic, since the first has infected the second, so this should actually continue. So what will happen is the second has to infect the third layer. So we will actually do the same process, meaning we will look in the 4 direction of the second layer. And if you notice for this second person here, he has one person to his left, which is susceptible. So it will affect that person. So this will become the third layer, while for this individual, to his left and to his right, both are susceptible, so it will become the third layer. So we will actually continue doing this for each layer until you get something like this. Okay, you have the third and the fourth. Okay, so please note that this is actually not the final, because you see for the fourth layer, they can actually continue to infect until it reaches an end. So you see for the fourth, it's still exposed to a susceptible individual. So you can still proceed with the infection. So for this step here, you want to see on your grid, how far does this infection go? So you should get something like this. So this is actually something how it look like without the numbers. So on your grid, try to complete the epidemic, complete the infection and see where it ends. So I'll give you all 30 seconds to actually proceed with this. So once you are done again, you can type done in the chat section and we will proceed to the next step. So Wani is done. Most of you all have also done it also. So once you actually repeat it to the end, and you will see that the final grid will look something like this, but this is where we exclude the numbers. So for this case here, this grid here, you can calculate and record the total number of cases. So in this case, if you actually calculate, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So a total of 19 cases in these 64 boxes. So for this game, you see, what do you realize from here is the virus will actually spread among the susceptible individual, but it will actually stop spreading and it actually creates a shield among the vaccinated participants. So this shield here was actually explained by Dr. Kavita in her talk just now, and it's actually called herd immunity because these vaccinated participants are actually acting as a shield for all the susceptible who are hiding behind them. So because of this, this grid here, or this infection here, this herd immunity is created, it will actually greatly affect something called the reproduction number, or R0, which was actually explained by Dr. Kavita also. So in order to actually see how the R0 changes, you can actually change the number of vaccinated individual and susceptible individuals. So because there is 3 grids on your side, you can actually try it with 48 vaccinated individual and 16 susceptible, or 16 vaccinated and 48 susceptible to record the total number of cases. So when you are doing that, you can actually see whether the herd immunity is achieved faster or slower. So again, this concept is actually like what Dr. Kavita has explained in the talk just now, which is related to the reproduction number. So just to recap is, the higher the reproduction number, the higher the infectability of a given virus and vice versa. So this concept also can actually be used to explain this famous graph, which can be seen quite often or quite frequently on our Health Directors General Facebook page. So as you can see, the R0, if there was no R0 here for the forecast case is 1.2, whereas if let's say we can curb the infection, it will actually drop from 1.2 to 0.8. So this is what we actually, this is actually what we key take away from our game here, which is the herd immunity and also the reproduction number. So hopefully you have gained some valuable knowledge from this game. And actually that will be the end of the game session for today's talk. So we hope that you have actually gained quite a lot from the Dr. Kavita's talk and also our game session today. So with that, I will actually end the talk here and we will actually proceed to the photo session. So I'll stop my screen sharing and I'll pass it to Zoe to proceed with the photo session.
Thank you, Matthew. We will now proceed with the photo sessions and we'll wait for 15 seconds for everyone to open their camera. So everyone, you can open your camera now before I take the photo. Okay, so since everyone have already opened your camera, right? I will take the photo now. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Okay. So we take another one with a peace sign. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you. So I'll pass the session back to Matthew now.
So thank you, Zoe, for the picture that you have taken. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, we have actually come to the end of our session. And we would actually like to say a big thank you to Dr. Kavita for her informative session on vaccination and all of your active participation in the session. So we would like to ask everyone to fill in your feedback form for this event by scanning the QR code and clicking on the link sent in the chat box by one of our committee. So we hope that you have enjoyed tonight's session, and today marks the third day of our virtual health week. If you are interested to learn more on different health aspects, do join us for our upcoming event as the registration is still open. Besides that, do follow our social media account, Sunway Student Volunteers, to keep updated on our upcoming events. You may scan the QR code in the slides for the feedback form. So once again, thank you everyone for joining. Stay safe and have a good night.
All right, good night, everyone.
There's actually 2 more participants left in the meeting room, so we'll just wait for another 1 more minute in case they are actually scanning the QR code.
Okay. Well, one is my mom actually.
Oh.
So yeah.
Oh. Maybe she can also give the feedback for the session.
I'm not sure if she knows how to do it, but yeah, give benefit of doubt.
No.
can remove participants, right, if you want to.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what you want to do now, but
Okay.
you know who the additional person is, and there's no risk for anything.
Okay, okay. Then I will remove. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that is, yeah, I think there's only us left. So I'll just briefly introduce, because I actually forgot to introduce you who is Chua Zoe here. So she's actually the secretary of SSV. She's actually the secretary of SSV, or she's actually also the previous health director last year. So yeah.
Director General of Health, is it, for SSV?
Yeah, she's actually our advisor to our department.
Okay, great. Hi, Zoe.
Hi. Very shy, sorry. Okay.
Suddenly you can become very shy
sudden.
lah.
And
Yeah.
thank you, Miss Kavita. Have a great session today.
Okay, thanks. Share the photos lah, like
Yeah, sure.
screenshots
Later
and
they will
stuff.
send
Yeah.
to you.
Thank you.
I think you can start the recording already.
Oh yeah. Oh my
Yeah,
God,
you can start the
recording.
recording.